Hey guys, I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. I'm excited to bring to you this conversation with Aaron Kellett. Aaron is the strength and conditioning coach working with Cricket Australia. So it was wonderful to have him come on and have a conversation with me. It's always wonderful to learn from someone who's got far more experience and knowledge in professional sport. It's great for me as a younger coach to be able to dig inside their mind and see how they think through some of the things that have been on my mind when it comes to developing athletes. I took a lot away from this conversation, so I hope you guys do too. If you guys do have any comments, feel free to drop them below. I make sure I try and get back to everyone, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
You live down in Balnarring, don't you?
Yeah.
It's lovely down there. One of my best mates has a holiday house down there. So
Right.
we spent a couple of New Year's, which was enjoyable. Beach is fantastic.
Yeah, we love it down here. Jen and my partner grew up down in Merricks here, so just a suburb up the road. So it's been a great lifestyle move for us, particularly with me spending so much time on the road.
Yeah. That's one of those things that I was curious actually to get your thoughts on that. I got a German girlfriend that I met like 2.5 years ago, and I think it's been 5 months tomorrow that we've sort of like been apart because of the whole Corona sort of thing. So I was actually curious to, I guess, what was it like for you? What sorts of things did you guys work through, or how did you guys best manage it? Or
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's a broad, open-ended question, but it's like
those questions.
2019. 2019. So last year we were in the UK for 4.5 months.
Yeah.
So like the first 2.5 months we were completely solo. Like we were into World Cup prep and then into the World Cup. So we're fortunate that we had a family support period. I mean, there's two of them, but the one that suited our family best was through the Ashes. So I didn't see Jen or the kids for better part of 2.5 months, and the girls, our twins, were, they were 12 weeks old when I left for Gallipoli. So yeah,
I can imagine why you put the work phone away and enjoy it as much as you possibly can.
Yeah. And the flip side, the flip side to that in my role is that when I came back from South Africa post the one-day series just before the sort of COVID, any of the New Zealand series that we'd scheduled. So from there through till notionally, leaving for Bangladesh for the Test series that was scheduled, I was going to be home, so play a leave window and the preparation period through there. So that's the flip side. That was 4.5 months in the UK. There's better part of 8 weeks where I'm actually out. I'm not having to go to the office. I'm not having to go into any academies outside of some specific conferences or just meet that we might schedule.
But yeah, no, it sounds. Did you guys have a chance to probably chat or communicate as much? It's the sort of thing where you'd almost have to be busy all day, and then you can only send WhatsApp voice messages and whatnot, being on different time schedules.
Yeah, you become. I mean, we become pretty adept at managing time. But it's hard. I mean, it's a bit hard when you've got kids because they're a little bit different. But the added complexity for us when we're in competition is that we've got the anti-corruption regulations that we need to hear. So once we have to arrive at a match venue, we're going to essentially no communications and phones get handed in. We're not online, so it becomes really challenging. So when, for example, when Germany into Labour, when they were a little early, it was day for the Sydney Test matches in, and you had to a team manager can get on him, so managed to get onto the media manager can actually have time. And so I decided to arrive early, so I had to depart Sydney to Peninsula.
Gotcha. It seems to be, I don't know, it's lagging and it's muffling your voice. I can't understand you as clear as Yeah, I work.
Addictions.
We're gonna work our way through technology.
We'll be right, mate.
I worked out the whole phones get taken away because I went to the conference, the cricket conference last year because Simon was presenting there, and you know he was the he was the first guy that I found when I was looking for bowling coaching, and it was really difficult to find anything. I get like technical in the sense that it like had a good biomechanical background, and I loved it. You know, like doing sports science. I finished sports science and had no idea what I was meant to do. I was one of those kids that when I finished year 12, you know, I really should have taken a year off. I didn't. It was silly, but saw sport and science in a course and went, that'll do for me, and didn't think as much about it coming out of the end. So I finished it and went, oh, well, I guess I'm coaching. I guess I'm doing like S&C type stuff, which I love. But then, you know, having to teach me that. And I met all these great researchers and great sorts of minds over there. And, you know, I didn't learn as much from the actual like presentations, but to have chats with these guys about their work and what they've learned. Like I had a chat last week with Pete Alway, who's done some stuff on stress fractures. We had a chuckle because apparently the ICC took his research and put it up on their like return to play type weekly guidelines, and we had a good chuckle over that. And then I thought, actually, and I met Ryan Campbell there as well and some of the other coaches. So I thought, well, I'm around England and Europe. I may as well see if I can, you know, touch base with these guys. And so I went down to Netherlands versus UAE, and I thought it was great. I could like sit next to him and you know, like ask all these questions and whatnot. Next thing I'm not cleared to be able to do that. And it makes total sense, but it had never crossed my mind. You know, he's just good old Stubbzy coming down to go, do you reckon I could just jump into the international setup and just, you know, pick a frame while there's an actual international game going on? And it dawned on me, hang on a second, this isn't exactly how it works. But so there's two. I was curious to get your thoughts on two things. One, I just watched. I saw this thing from Cal Dietz talking about not tensing in a squat, or like, and I found it really interesting because when I was doing some of my own like movements intuitively, sometimes when I was trying to be more relaxed, holding a good position, and then taking myself through a movement, it almost felt like I greased the groove a lot better. And when I'd try and like set, you know, you sort of your big powerlifting type brace and go through movements, it just never felt as good. I was just always thought the way that you should do it is to, you know, brace yourself. But I probably found that when I've coached people to, I don't know, tuck the bottom rib and just set some ab tension as opposed to using that more intra-abdominal pressure, it's probably felt a lot better. I was curious if you had ever had any like thoughts or experience on something like that.
Yeah, I mean, more broadly, you probably know that, and practically as coaches, we experience that a lot of movement efficiency isn't actually about traction, right? It's actually about relaxation. It's about getting out of the way of the movement as much as it is, you know, rather than interfering with it. That's really what I think about when you describe that.
That's when you say getting out of the way of it, that sounds like exactly how it kind of felt. I felt like sometimes I was getting in my own way. And I had a girl who came down and trained on Monday, and she's, you know, the kind of, you know, trainer who burns herself out, takes herself so far into, you know, overtraining and whatnot. And I took her through some of that sort of stuff because she'd been having a few back issues, and she found that I actually saw a movement like at the start, very much weight shifted back on the heels. And she does have long femurs, but she's got herself into such a poor position, or like one of those sort of common low bar squat positions you might see. But for a while, relaxing, I was impressed. Bolt upright, and I never thought of that before, to be more relaxed. And I've looked at some stuff from David Gray. I was curious to get his thoughts on my Achilles, because, you know, right arm bowler, I've got an issue with my left Achilles. So when I try and slam my front foot down, it just always pinches and it shits me in. And he does a lot of stuff on, you know, stacking the ribs and pelvis and some of those isometrics that you sort of see these days. The the breathing was something I was curious about as well. You know, is doing some of those 90-90 breathing work drills you might do in a warm up, or teach guys how to breathe and use that to help with their positions.
Sorry, I've just got my kids are trying to walkie-talkie me. So if I sing, sorry, I'm trying to say I'm on a call.
A bit muffled, so I'm trying to pay as close attention, but sometimes your screen freezes, and I just have to hope that it's still working.
I heard it all. I was just sorry, Matt. I was just a bit distracted. The kids were trying to walkie-talkie me from the backyard. Dada,
That's horrible to me.
Call, darling.
I can't wait to have that sort of something one day. I tell my girlfriend, go, babe, do you mind if you go and make all the money and I can just be a stay-at-home dad and do some of this kind of stuff?
Yeah. Well, this is the challenge. Like this is the intricacy and complexity around the working from home. So it's really great because I'm at home, right? But the challenge is then the kids know that you're home.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to. Honestly, if I could, I'd love to do this sort of stuff. Like try and share as much information as possible, and hopefully be able to run, I don't know, a couple of workshops a year and coach seasonally, and then travel.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
Like, that's the beauty of dating European. I reckon I've explored half the world. And there's a guy who's only been to England when I was 16 on a cricket tour, and Hawaii.
Well, let's hope things can open up again.
That.
But I mean, circling back around to the sort of start of that. Well, at the end of the day, that's the heart of good coaching, right? Is actually trying to unlock the things that are actually going to free up the outcome you're trying to elicit.
Yeah. So
whether that's a more efficient expression of force, or that's a more a cleaner movement pattern, a different a change in movement. It's actually about unlocking those things. And like I said right at the start, like sometimes it's actually about finding the cue, or finding the tool, whether it be a constraint or otherwise, that's actually going to unlock the thing that you're trying to elicit. And sometimes it's literally about getting out of the way, or trying to remove an obstacle or remove a barrier.
Yeah, no, I like that. The constraint stuff, I think, is massive. I reckon the more or like, that intrinsic, extrinsic type stuff, letting people figure it out themselves a lot of the time, like give them a challenge. I'd seen that a lot more in the fast bowling type stuff. In the gym though, I think sometimes you put them in the right positions and then see if they can feel it. One of the things that I was curious about sort of linking together was you do get people in that kind of naturally extended sorts of positions. Sometimes I think, the ribs might be flared up a bit, pelvis might be a little bit tilted, and I don't get this nice stack. And I was thinking about it from, if I, like, what could I do in the gym, run mechanics and whatnot, that would almost like subconsciously coach their bowling action, and if you get guys bowling that are really up like this, I just don't think the way that their torso is positioned, you're not going to be able to even use the abs. It'd be such a poor length of tension relationship. And I sort of was wondering, like, what kinds of conversations you might have had along a similar sense about trying to map out what's going to work with some of these guys, whether it be, the back foot contact type stuff, holding that, the front leg position, what sorts of coaching conversations your mind had run through.
Well, my first thought is that some of that sort of skill integration stuff, that's probably best left for fast bowling coaches who are far smarter and technically have far greater technical nous than me, or someone like Steph Jones, right, who is really active in trying to connect and go down that path and broaden the scope of practice in that area. But in terms of, so if we use front foot contact as an example, right? Like I'm probably attacking, physical limitations. Yeah. So if there's observed physical limitations, then I'm attacking the capacity issue, and I'm then trying to figure out activities that are going to provide some form of transfer. And you can use whatever classification system you want to use, whether that's a Bondarchuk system or whatever. You can determine how you might classify something that you believe has high transfer, because without getting sidetracked, that's that's an argument in and of itself, right? Because, what has high transfer for one athlete may have really low transfer for another, depending on a whole range of factors, right? And the other argument is, how are you actually measuring it? How are you measuring that it is actually transferring? Because there's a whole gamut of training interventions and stimuli that are being imposed on this athlete. So how do you know it's actually that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But I think that, there's the guiding principles around, contraction type, timing, etc., that you can use to form a logical basis for your rationale.
Being that I try and coach the bowling and the S&C, I definitely went down the route of combining the two of them, and I reckon the more I've split them apart now and just kept it as simple as fucking possible, I've probably gotten the best result. So the specificity and like the transferability discussion, like, remember I was having a chat with Jay about it, and I was like, can someone give me their thoughts, because I think you can almost go too specific, and then all of a sudden I don't see that's such a rabbit hole. But how much is too specific? And then if you get too specific, aren't you neglecting some of the general, structural qualities that, if you develop them, they would indirectly or directly support that? Yeah.
Well, I think it's a big misconception about the concept of specificity, right? It's just because it looks like sport or part of sport doesn't actually necessarily mean specific.
Yeah.
Right. And the converse is equally true. And it's the same with transfer. Just because something may have low transfer or perceived low transfer doesn't mean it has low value.
Yeah, that's well said. So this is the sort of stuff, like those one-liners are just gold.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, training factors and physical adaptations are sometimes complementary.
Yeah.
And to achieve the outcome, sometimes you need to sequence a few things before you get there. So, some of those more general, general development exercises, right? Or general preparatory exercises, I should say, may, on the spectrum of transfer be on the lower end. They actually can sometimes set up the success of future training phases or future training interventions. So actually really high value.
Yeah.
So it's about when you do them, how much you do them, and why you're doing them.
Makes total sense, and I like to think about it as those, those four coactives, your tactical, technical, this and that. And I, being in my position as a coach who, I'm not working in a compartmentalized elite team, so I can sort of afford to try to coach as much as possible, but be a good generalist in a sense. And whether I sort of looked at the physical side was, if you develop those biomotor qualities, it's just like a general rule, you're going to do pretty well. And I think it's combining that sort of stuff that's where, interesting to get somebody else's opinion on that, because like you said about how do you track it, how do you tell which thing's working for what, because researchers can't do that. That's where research usually tends to fall down, because it's just not possible to isolate one single variable.
The other thing that I think about when we talk about this concept is that where do you go? Where do you turn to once you've eked out all of the possible adaptations from, these, and I use the terms loosely, these high specificity or high transfer training activities? Where do you turn to?
That's a good point.
Because at some point, there's a law of diminishing returns. So where do you go then?
I do wonder how. Using Steph as an example, how he puts this all together, because he is definitely someone that I've learned a lot from, but he's also someone that's probably confused me more than anybody else. And it's hard to know what to take and what not to take, because at the moment, Simon's great with this as well. It's just so much of it seems conceptual, and the knowledge that I want is I want to understand the thinking, like what makes you. What's thought you down this path and said that, no, we aren't going to use, say, Olympic lifts, One of the things that irks me with Olympic lifts is it seems whenever someone talks about them, they use a picture of an elite Olympic lifter who's injuring himself, and then that's their how they present it. If I taught someone a muscle clean, just a muscle clean, well, that's a pretty straightforward exercise. it could be good for their wrists. I could probably look to progress that. I see merit in maybe teaching that movement, and say a muscle snatch or a hang snatch, like that can't be so bad for your shoulders that you a 20 kilogram bar as is going to be dangerous. It baffles me.
Yeah, there's no bad exercises, right? I don't believe there is. It's just bad application of them.
Yeah.
So, yeah. The Olympic lifts. You're talking about polarizing topics that I just avoid diving into the sort of back and forth in most cases, because I just find it a complete waste of time.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In my world with my athletes, I don't make it either or. Because the reality is that at a national team level, you're inheriting athletes from a variety of programs, a variety of different coaches, and a variety of different training philosophies. So whilst you may have a set of ideals that you deem as being optimal, the reality is that you can't guarantee that your athletes are going to come to you having been exposed to the same methods that you might apply in that philosophy. So you've got to navigate your way through it to determine the path forward, but also what's going to give this athlete the best chance to address some of the physical qualities you need to address, but also keep them performing at the highest level.
No, definitely. Have you had many guys come and have had a background of doing some sort of lifts and whatnot that you've sort of like kept going?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time.
Yeah,
and the alternative equally. So everyone asks me, "Oh, do you Olympic lift your athletes?" Yeah, the ones that've been exposed to Olympic lifting.
Yeah,
but the ones who haven't been exposed to a history of Olympic lifting, well, I'm not doing that 2 weeks out from an international competition. And whilst there might be some merit in me spending 5 or 10 minutes with them individually every session to do some technical work and start building some exposure to that.
Yeah,
I do that, but equally, it's may not necessarily represent a great bang for my buck in terms of time.
Definitely.
So you have to find another way. At the end of the day, I'm sure I heard this from someone. Like we can't really tell the difference between a brain tumor and a headache, right? So I don't know. Can our body truly tell the difference between different exercises if the force profiles, the timing profiles, and the contraction types are essentially the same? That's what we're responding to, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're adapting to. We're not adapting to, the name of the exercise.
And I like to understand why people think a certain way, so it's funny. I feel like I do like to, some of those contentious topics, not so much to have an opinion, but to understand both sides. Because I feel like for me, that's going to help me take the greatest understanding to take my coaching forward. And it's a good point, because I think I know that I've gotten, or I don't see my mind where, because I haven't done a whole lot of coaching, given that I've been around the world so often, but just in my own thoughts, like specificity is a sort of topic that, you could go down a rabbit hole so much and find yourself on the other side, having developed no structural or general physical demands. And then I think guys are going to get injured. That's sort of where I see it going. Too specific, get injured, and then there's the specializing too early. And then you see guys that stop playing different sports at 12, 13, 14, but they end up being the ones that are probably going to be at a higher risk of injury because they just haven't gotten this general robustness. And it's probably a good question about what sorts of things you'd recommend people to start with if you're looking at it from a kid wants to, or a junior wants to start, just run, jump, change direction, start to learn some movement.
Yeah. Look, I'm a parent of 3 young kids, right? Like my eldest is turning 3 next month, so I haven't really got to the stage where that's a reality for us. Yet necessarily, other than sort of play, which is a big deal. And I've probably got that far away from that front line with my work recent years that probably I'm a bit out of touch with what the landscape looks like. But in my previous role, we had a developmental program with athletes that were ranging from sort of 13 upwards, right? And the biggest thing that we felt was that we need to expose them to a broader range of movements and a broader range of physical exposures than they were likely to get from simply the sport alone. So that's the sort of guiding principle I'd be running with my children, is trying to provide as broad an exposure to those types of things as I can, so that if and when they so choose to go down a more specific path, they've actually got a wide spectrum of skills and abilities and physical qualities that they can draw upon to go forward with.
Oh, definitely. I was curious actually, what sorts of things do you see would be like different between your elite and your sub-elite?
In terms of in what specifically?
It's the training different. One of the things that I was curious about was periodization. Because it's almost like it's a different game. Like the people that I would work with, it's a Saturday cricket match, sometimes Saturday, Sunday, train Tuesday, Thursday. That's it's easy to periodize for. But for say an international sort of athlete with 3 different formats, cycling through travel and this and that type of thing, I was curious. Almost like how you go and design programs and try to periodize it and map in different focuses, or is it just purely conjugate style, loading it, trying to keep everything as tip top as you possibly can?
Yeah, in its most simplistic manner, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is we're basically training everything all the time at various levels, and more often than not at the international level, you're trying to provide more of the things that they're not getting from heavy density of competition. So probably contrary to what some people may think, when we're in the thick of high amounts of competition, I'm doing very general work because they're getting a hell of a lot of specific work from the sport.
That's perfect. Exactly. Like, again, that was my thought about the whole specificity question. When guys are actually playing, well, they're doing it. Aren't I just almost in my role trying to get their bodies to a point where they can just keep training and playing and developing in that sense?
Yes. Yes.
Well, actually, I asked Simon what sorts of like questions to ask, and he was sort of curious. like what sort of is it more towards intervention? Is it more towards performance? Which I'm assuming like it is both. I think Simon's got his research study that he's curious to get some insights in. But I think he was curious what sort of a balance you have between, at the most general level, is it just keeping them on the park? Is there a whole lot of looking to improve performance? Then I wonder.
Yes. Yeah, but those become narrower in focus as the athlete gets better,
like running
because the actual physical links to specific performance become less obvious, for want of a better term, or the bang for your buck becomes less and less. I mean, you ask the question, what's the difference? I mean, it's quite simply, they're better cricketers, right? So that's the difference. Their skills make them stand out. And then I see my job as being critical to make sure that they've got the physical qualities that are going to allow them to express that for as high potential as they can for as long as they can.
So I remember seeing some of the Instagram posts that you did with these guys that, the fast bowlers are running 40 odd Ks across 2 days and doing this and doing that. And it's, I've always thought fast bowling. So it's almost like one of the most unique skills and things you can do. If I could try to compare it, I don't know if you should compare, but if I thought about different sports and whatnot and go, that's a lot. When you're building these guys up to like being able to do that, my question was more about like periodization and whatnot. How do you go about tracking like how much strength work do they try to do to maintain that sort of a base? How much actual running work volume wise do you try to accumulate up? And is it like, do you do much max effort type sprinting to try to, I guess that's pretty a general question. More like, how do you put things into your program so I can sort of get an idea of how you'd think about program design for an elite athlete?
Yeah, so like the best way I can do it, I'll try and avoid jargon as much as I can. That it's in a mixed methods, vertically integrated approach, right? So essentially, you're training everything. It's just that you're sort of integrating the various training factors and prioritizing different qualities at different times. So right now, practically, we're in a very rare and unique scenario where international cricketers, certainly Australian international cricketers, are back in home state programs in a pre-season, which is so rare, right? We're normally working in, if we can, and this is the thing with periodization, oftentimes it's about using the opportunities that present either between competitions, and that's rare, or you're manufacturing these periods through selection, or it's being manufactured for you through injury. And you go back and you address some of the underlying physical qualities that you've got time to do, right? To address. So, it's rare, but even then the approach doesn't really change. We're always sprinting, we're always running, we're always lifting, we're always throwing, we're always doing our skill work. So, the only time with fast bowlers, the only thing we do factor in is periods off bowling to provide some sort of bony adaptation time. That's the only really, they're the times we don't necessarily bowl, but you're still training.
So that might be a good question, because I will put a mini clip of this up. I feel like people have this, or they don't know what the elites actually do in regards to actually how much they bowl, and maybe it's a real subcontinent time thing where they think you can bowl every day and you can do this, do that. And I think guys like Mitchell Starc, Cummins, and all these guys end up bowling 60 to 70 to 80 overs a week. But I'm guessing they probably might not even bowl in between a test match. They might roll out just roll the arm over, get some movement, and then end up having 2 to 3 days rest in between sorts of sessions. Like, is that sort of how you map the workloads out?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, yeah. So we've got historical information that we lean upon with these guys in terms of what they've been able to cope with and what they've sort of, what the threshold of concern might look like. And then we're essentially, working within some of those constraints, or sometimes the game imposes the reality for us that so in those types of scenarios, and I might be jumping around, but you're essentially prioritizing match balls, right?
Yeah.
When you're operating a red line, then everything becomes about your match outputs.
Yeah.
And then if there's a skill issue or a confidence issue, well, we have to figure that out as a team, as a coaching team.
Yeah, I like those tangents, like, taking conversations off in different directions. I don't want you to just stay on point. I want you to take it off tangents. Like, where you take it is where I feel like I'm going to get the most learning, because it'll unlock certain key points. Where,
and I was going to say the other thing we've learned over time is that the research has given us some greater levels of insight into what some of the guiding principles are for us. Like, we know that whilst the game's going to demand that players bowl repeated days, that's a repeated bowling day after day is a risk factor for bony stress, right? That's just a reality, because the tissue doesn't like it. Right? So it likes cyclical loading. Bone loves cyclical loading. Stimuli, adaptation time, stimulus, adaptation. It loves that. So wherever possible in our preparation cycles, we try and use that as a guiding principle. Now, I'm not saying you never do it. But you have to pay the piper at some point, right?
I think, and this is something that Pete was saying. He was like, some of his research was looking at like insufficient rest was just the highest, risk factor. And I think saying that maybe some of the recommendation in the future could be a longer break over Christmas, that guys can get 3 to 4 weeks off instead of, just 2. And that would give them a long enough period. But if it ends up being over 4 weeks, or like even 8 weeks, then it ends up being too much. And I think there was something in that where if you went over a certain period, like 12 weeks, something like that, it'd take you a year to get back what you lost. And there was something, I wish I remembered it. But
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm not going to venture down the path of trying to quote the stats or the results, but the ECB released some research, or recently, that looked at essentially de-adaptation, right? Loss of bone mineral density in the pars, from time off bowling, so basically involution, right? So that certainly, if you don't bowl for too long, then you're going to actually reduce your adaptation to the demands of the activity.
It's one of those things that I thought the reason, one of the reasons why the elite seem to keep or they seem to continuously develop or like stay at this level. If you look at amateur sport, they have 5-6 months off, and you might see you build up, structural qualities, you build up strength, you build up bowling speed, and then you stop for so long that you end up losing it. And then how are you going to get to the elite level? You just aren't training enough to be able to do that, And actually, one of my questions maybe about, say, if you were training someone in their off season, like how you might balance that, doing some hypertrophy work or some strength work. I mean, this is probably an individual specific type question, but
sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, sure. Yeah, but we can speak in generalities, right?
I like generalities. Is it more applicable for more people? And then I think I'll find something specific to filter down into.
So the caveat that we say is that the immediate answer is it depends, right? So pushing that aside, we will talk in some generality. So repeat the question in its most general sense.
Off season, like how could you go about structuring your off season when you're not going to be bowling as much, and you can say, look at some more strength conditioning type investment.
Yeah, so front end your pre-season with addressing the underlying physical qualities that are going to help and underpin your performance, and then as you start to elevate the prioritization and requirement from a skills perspective, you deprioritize the shifting the needle on some of the physical qualities, and that moves towards supporting and reinforcing the ability to stay in your practice environment and continue to work on your skills. There you go. There's a nice general answer for you.
Nice, yeah, a nice philosophy to break down, and that's
this sort of nice little crossover period, right?
Yeah, I like that, and it's those sorts of overriding principles, or like general philosophies that I think that's where I think is great. If you can put a framework up, like I remember I was writing some stuff down. This study's a mess, but I just really wanted to have some sort of a philosophy or a framework to be able to build conversations off. Mm-hmm. For instance, well, the objective goal is to win. You might think you want to win with some integrity because that filters into some other stuff. And then, well, bowlers need to take wickets or like reduce their runs. And then I think that leads off into some nice conversations about how we can support a bowler physically, how we can support a bowler tactically, and in those sorts of things. And that's, those kinds of philosophies that I can draw out of other people, depending on how they have their own analogies or their own. I think I've seen you do have a few good analogies and a few good quotes. So they're the sorts of like things that I'm looking to draw out, because like one simple phrase can just carry so much weight and understanding and make something so clear for someone who is so confused. Well, actually, one of the things I was curious about is has there been much research or like knowledge around like how to go about performance with the, say, like elite guys that you've found more on I know you've got the big rocks and you've got the specifics and whatnot. Is there anything that maybe you've learned over time or that you found in research, you found like data mining your own guys to go, actually, you know what, this ends up tending more towards performance outcomes?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is when I think, so I'm shooting from the hip a little bit. There's certainly not enough, and there's not many sort of weakness in applied research, I think, which is the lack of intervention studies in sport, right? Like, so we understand some of the indicators or metrics around what performance looks like, the demands of various sports, but we haven't. There's not enough you do X, you get Y,
Yeah.
right? And these are the outcomes. So it's a lot of correlation-based sort of work. So again, if we're going to go now, what does that mean for me and my experience, or me and my athletes? Our fast bowlers at the international level, by and large, right? If we're talking in generalities, by and large, are stronger, and they're a little bit more powerful than their sort of counterparts at the lower levels.
Yeah.
That's probably the sort of, and again, I'll be really, really clear about there's always extremes and there's always exceptions to the rule. But by and large, the guys tend to be stronger or able to produce more force, and they're a little bit more powerful, depending on which measure you use. So that's obviously one of the things that I think is really important. The other thing is that, look, by and large, all of our contracted players, all of our Australian players, and I'm sure if you speak to Phil Scott and Rob Arron in England, they'll tell you exactly the same thing. By and large, the profile of your international cricketer from just a general physical perspective is across the board probably slightly better than their counterparts at the lower levels, right? And again, exceptions to the rule. Difference quality is going to be elevated in certain areas depending on the type of who it is and what they do for a job, cricket wise. But by and large, they're better athletes. It just also so happens that their skill set is superior.
That's it. Yeah, I guess it all comes back to that superior skill set. and then
you're splitting hairs between whether Mitchell Starc and Pat Cummins are physically better in certain areas than James Anderson or Stuart Broad, or
Is there anything that you'd want further research in, or that is there anything around performance interventions that you'd go, you know what, I would like to know more about, I'd like to see some more research on this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so without sort of, I'm not giving too many secrets away, we're trying to investigate. We're trying to investigate what some of the more specific links around how you're producing force, and the types of force and its relationship to ball speed.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of stuff that we infer from other sports, whether that's from, javelin throwing, or whether that's from throwing sports like baseball.
Yeah.
And so the strength and power links to throwing velocity, for example. Yeah. But cricket fast bowling, whilst it shares similar types of movement profiles, it's a very unique activity, given we're using a straight arm.
That's it. I do sort of
feel
specific as, I'm not sure, but I know people like to draw comparisons from baseball and javelin, but a baseballer doesn't have any momentum, so it's it's really different, and then a javelin thrower doesn't have to aim the javelin, and they do it once or twice. I feel like even though the movement looks, maybe it comes back to that, just because it looks similar doesn't mean it is similar, and maybe there's some things that we can learn, but maybe there's some more we have to know about.
That's what I do commend Steph, because he's been as open and transparent about the data that he's got from his his case studies that he's working with, that he's really pushed forward the understanding, or the notion of actually some of the objective understanding of the things that are impacting the performances he's looking at.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, but we know that the run-up's going to contribute somewhere to 20%ish of your ball speed, right? So that we know that, therefore we then infer, okay, if we can improve our running performance in some way, shape, or form, we should technically be able to enhance that. It explains some of the variance. But then we also know that, okay, it's not just as simple as running in faster, because you then got to handle the collision better.
Yeah.
Right? So what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not clean. So that's where, you asked me about research. Those are the things that interest me. I think there's a lot more value in us being, a bit more systematic in the way we're measuring our, the stimulus we're imposing,
yeah,
and then the outcome, the performance outcomes that we're hoping to impact, and actually trying to understand its relationships better. So that's more like classic field-based sort of model, practitioner-based model versus the academic model.
Yeah. Do you end up chatting with your counterparts at the ECB? Because I remember, part of the conference was, like Paul Felton and Kevin Shine giving a presentation, and I probably hassled Paul more than anybody else over the last 9 months, but it seemed like the way that they were operating as a unit, and then add Rob in there as well, doing coaching their fast bowlers and doing that. I was curious if there was anything from that you picked up or similar in the way that you guys operate as a team to sort of take care of the fast bowlers. I'm probably asking you to think about what the bowling coach is doing and what that links back into your coaching outcome.
Yeah. So the first answer to the first part of your question is, yeah, absolutely. We talk all the time. It's a small network of colleagues that are working across international cricket. So
like any dinners and whatnot that I can just invite myself down to. Oh, I would. I'll pay.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. When we're lucky enough, we sometimes we do. So yeah, you'll have to sort of get yourself onto those, mate.
Just on a side thought, all the coaches that I seem to see, they all play golf. Now, I'm not a bad golfer. I'm probably a terrible golfer, but I just thought, if I play golf, I'd probably end up having 10 times the amount of networks because they always seem to find themselves out of the golf course.
Sure.
Oh gosh, that might be a good investment in my career.
Yeah, it's not an area I tend to do a lot of networking personally. So.
Oh gosh, sorry. Did I cut you?
Getting back to the question. So you've generally, mate, there's not a lot that we're doing differently to the rest of the world, right? So certainly some of the bigger cricketing nations, for example. The ECB are using catapult technology. We're using catapult technology. India are using stat sport technology. They're all doing various forms of mixed method training. They're using research to infer their practice as much as they can. So there's not a hell of a lot different. Sometimes it's just about the way the way we're individually navigating the various cultural differences or system differences between the two countries. So for example, county cricket, 20 odd counties and a hell of a lot more practitioners and heavy domestic competition schedules. Versus India, some of the various system challenges that might present compared from a international resource versus a provincial or state resource. The facilities available for different environments. So oftentimes it's less about the what we're doing, but how we have to go about doing it.
And that's the way that you would think through that is something that I'd be interested in. Because like you said, I'm guessing that not a whole lot is going to be a whole lot different. So it's if you can put 90% out there and then that 10% that people sort of think through, that's what I'm curious to gain people's insights. And then also that, where my experience lacks, I can then afford to try to gain other people's experience and wisdom and try to put that into my back pocket and then go, if someone asks me a question, well, I can say, well, look, this guy said this, so it's probably we can go. Actually,
the other layer that's probably worth discussing, right, is that so if you look at this period right now, there's no international cricket happening. So what am I doing? Well, I'm working, but this is the gap as well, where the role of a coach at my level, so the things that I'm doing, the things that Nick Webb is doing for India, the things that Rob and Phil Scott are doing for the England team in similar periods. Your players are not with you. So I'm not going to a training environment, and all of my fast bowlers, for the sake of the discussion, all of my fast bowlers aren't arriving at the one training environment, and we're getting stuck into executing on a training plan that's trying to work from point A to point B. That's not happening, right? That's not the world we live in. It's not AFL footy.
Yeah.
My job is to manage outcomes, right? So that when we actually do arrive at the international cricket level, we've got the players at point B. But to do that, I need other coaches, other practitioners to be able to deliver on the training to get to that point.
Yeah.
So that's the other layer that's really important to talk about specifically with cricket, is that as a practitioner, you're actually a piece of the system.
Yeah.
Right? Because your player, because of the nature of the competition and the sport itself, your player is transitioning from environment to environment all the time. They're going up and down and sideways.
Yeah.
From international cricket to domestic cricket to franchise cricket. So you actually got players going everywhere, and you've got to manage those outcomes or play the various roles you may have at various points in time to facilitate achieving those outcomes.
It's a really interesting, sort of bring it back to the whole periodization point around. So when they are obviously going around and doing things different counties, does it become a thing where you're now like consulting, or are you still overseeing and they're implementing? Because is that sort of how it sort of works? Like, is there always
different practitioners under different systems will do it differently.
Yeah.
But the way I do it is that I will operate on a different points on a spectrum of, heavy prescription to light so heavy prescription, right? But obviously the necessity for others to implement, versus being really clear on the outcomes we're looking for and allowing a little bit more freedom and autonomy for the practitioner to prescribe the content, and we'll just manage the outcome. So there's a range of methods that you're employing at various stages, with either different athletes or different environments or different times of the year.
Definitely makes sense.
So for me, it's not one or the other. It's all of the above at different points in time.
Does that ever get quite challenging to communicate with different coaches with different philosophies and different ways of doing things, or is it usually people are fairly communicable? Or
Yeah, I mean, my experience across a lot of time in sport is that we're all passionate, we're all trying to achieve, we're all committed to wanting our athletes to do really well. So that's the common ground. And then oftentimes where we get a bit stuck is on, the methods or, the ways we're going about doing it. So, I try to focus on the common ground. And like the other thing I've said previously to some people is that in my role, I'm far more addicted to the outcome than I am the method.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really well said.
I have to be. Yeah. Because as a coach, yourself that more often than not, the program that's going to get the best outcome is the one that's coached the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the one that's coached the best may actually be the one that you put together versus the one I put together and ask you to deliver on.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, actually. But being outcome focused and then building back and not being too attached to a coaching method is definitely something that I think, that's actually probably something that any S&C coach should probably become aware of, because I feel like if you're program focused, that's your ego starting to filter into what you attach onto, this program is so good because it looks very pretty and it's got some fancy.
Yeah. And oftentimes we look, it's all a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the training performance actually doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's inconsequential if it doesn't relate to performance. So, we've all heard extreme stories of guys with horrendous trainers, not very committed, it's great performers.
Yeah.
So does that make it wrong, or is that just something that we've become attached to?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying it's unimportant. It's very clear. There's a lot of strong links to show that this is important, but I think sometimes we can value the wrong things too highly.
Yeah. Completely agree with that. It's almost sort of one of the reasons why I wanted to put a framework up in front of me, or just like map some thoughts down onto a philosophy to make sure that I don't get caught up in a rabbit hole, putting my attention into a bucket that I'm forgetting the big rocks while looking around for real small ones and going, this is where I found it, this golden nugget, which doesn't exist.
And that's the as coaches, like, and that's where our various roles oftentimes just need a recalibration at times, which is that we're actually about trying to help this athlete achieve their dreams, and that's about performance. It's actually not about the, turning up to the 3 sessions a week they're doing with you, or the the preseason program. It's all a means to an end. Everything is a means to an end.
So I feel like mindset, I know that, I love mindset. I think it's fascinating. I think it's one of my favorite things to talk about. The other side of my work is I coach a lot of women. So I love being supportive in that role of helping them with their challenges. And I think because you are a coach, that ends up being almost one of the biggest impacts you can have, because you can give the program, you can coach the program, but if they have something that you could support them with, or that you could help them with an analogy or with something to send them on their way, then to me it seems like, then that should be a part of your role as a coach, instead of you just coach weights.
Yeah, well, that's ultimately one of the key roles of training or preparation, right? It's actually building the, not only the physical qualities that are required for performance, but actually building the and I'm shooting from the hip a bit, but it's building the confidence to know that you've done the work that's going to actually hold you in good stead for performance, right? And it's just happens that our avenue into that domain is through the physical, right? We do the physical work, and we address the physical qualities that are going to play the role necessary to underpin and support their performance, right? Other roles are that your technical coaches are providing the technical and tactical component and the reinforcement support, so they know they've done the work to go out and perform. If you're in programs that have psychologists involved, it's the same thing. You're giving the sort of the psychological and mental strategies to know you've done the work to build the confidence necessary, right? That's a really loose talk, but you can see what we're trying to get to.
One thing I wanted to ask around like axial loading and back squats. This is where I'm sort of curious about. Like, from my experience, I felt good putting a barbell on my back, doing back squats and bowling. I was curious if there was certain, again, no bad exercises, just bad programming. If there were things that in your program description you went, you know what, I know that they're going to have to put a lot of force to their spines and whatnot. I might use some adjustments. And was there certain things that into your programs, like is back squats something that you use regularly, or conventional bar deadlifts? I know trap bar is probably the go-to these days.
Yeah, so I'm gonna navigate around specifics and speak from a guiding principles perspective. At the end of the day, as coaches and practitioners, we need to be mindful about the stress mix, the overall stress mix.
Yeah.
So in periods where you're bowling a lot of cricket balls, you have a high amount of force that's going through the lumbar spine, right? Because of the skill stimulus that's being imposed. So as practitioners, I think we need to be mindful about where other stressors, similar stressors are coming from, but that actually we're not just putting stress on stress past the tolerable threshold for the tissue. Okay.
Yeah.
So for me, it's actually just being mindful about the things you're selecting as part of the overall training plan, and what the overall stress mix looks like in relation to the capacity of tolerance of the various tissues you're exposing to.
Yeah, the balancing stress is a good way of defining your role as an S&C coach. I'm a stress manager, putting on stress, making sure we're not doing. So the obvious flow on then, right, in the types of examples you talked about, is if you're bowling 300 balls a week, that's a high amount of force and stress that's being put onto your pars, for example. I would recommend
that you be very selective about what other stressors you're putting into the program that are going to add more stress to that area. Similarly, if you're in a jumping sport and you're doing hundreds upon hundreds of repetitions of spiking a volleyball, for example, I'd be very mindful about what other knee focused activities or quad focused activities I'd be imposing on an athlete.
Is this when, now I'm getting a bit more specific, but where some of those isometrics and whatnot come in, like whether it's some of it's Alex Natera's like positional isometrics that you can sort of layer in, or even if it was just a mid-thigh pull or something like that, because you don't want to add the same eccentric load, but you want to get something in. It's probably a specific sort of case study, but I'm guessing there's times during.
So the types of it's actually being creative, but also logical in actually thinking about what are we trying to elicit, what's the adaptation we're trying to elicit, and what do we need to be mindful of. So yes, you might think that a barbell hip thrust might actually become a more attractive proposition for you for an athlete that has lumbar pathology and is bowling 40 overs in that week.
Is it often that the guys end up bowling 40 to 50 overs in a week? I'm guessing. I remember you saying
during a test match in Australia, we're having to prepare our guys to bowl 45 overs in a match.
What's the most you've seen?
In a fast bowler?
I'm really curious because I want to put this and say the most that, the coach of Australia has seen a fast bowler do is this much. Now, if you're going over that, then you're an idiot.
Ironically, I think the most I've actually seen firsthand is probably Neil Wagner last summer. He bowled like 60 something overs or 70 overs or something.
Yeah.
The guy's just like, he's a machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. We know that when international fast bowlers bowl more than 50 overs in a test match, they are very likely in the next month to have a problem.
Yeah. I guess I'm almost curious to try to break down some real specific case studies to see how you go about balancing that. But I almost feel like I'm guessing part of your role is going, I'm going to have to adapt and adjust and auto-regulate so much given the information that you're going to get from games and whatnot. It's and that might be where, for me, looking at cricket as a sport, it is so variable in the kind of workloads, intensities that end up coming out of it. It's not like baseball where you can throw 100 pitches and that's it. Or javelin, that's where I'm at.
So what you tend to find is that you start building some scenarios. You build some templates on the most likely scenarios that are likely to happen. So the schedule's known, start dates of matches are known, and then you've got scenario plans based on the finish times of various matches in competition. I'm talking about. So where the schedule may determine that if the match goes 5 days, you may then have an 8-day break. Well, if the match goes 3 days, well, hallelujah, you've got some extra days.
Yeah.
So you've got some scenarios that you might turn to from there.
I was curious. Actually, one of the things I was curious about, because I remember you saying when you came down to Woodford around Hazlewood being in that period of injury, and you can. I remember you saying I was curious to get it sure, but say if you have a stressy and you can deadlift, provided there's no pain, I feel like some people are almost so scared to load their bodies that they'll shy away from the things that they need to do to build up the capacities.
Yeah. So, and what's the question?
Can you load a stress spine, provided there's probably a yes or no type of answer, but provided there's obviously no pain or anything?
Yeah. Hello. So the answer is it depends on what phase you're in post injury, right? So one of the guiding principles around our rehab is that we're trying to spend the first phase essentially allowing the bone to remodel and heal depending on how injured it is. So we're trying not to impose stress on it. But after that, we actually need to impose stress because that's actually going to help with the healing from there. So it's actually about gradually reintroducing stimuli that are going to stress that area.
I think most people need to encapsulate that and go, I need to get stronger. Actually,
can you give me 2 minutes? I just need to duck to the bathroom.
I can. One of the things I was curious about as well, around the foot and ankles as well, you know, I feel like as an athletic coach, easy to get caught up in the knees, hips and trunk and whatnot. Is there much sort of stuff that you actually put into your programs around the foot and ankle?
Yeah, so I mean, again, so I'm one of the things I've just probably always done is I've always done, regardless of the level of athlete, regardless of the sport, I've always incorporated, you know, basic sort of heel raise, calf raise type activities and incorporated low level extensive plyos. It's just, you know, pogo jumps, various skip progressions. It's just always, all parts of the year, all time. It's just always incorporating that stuff.
Definitely.
I think it's really important.
I think that's where I might be getting specific in the sense of trying to put, say, some like spring ankle type stuff in where you're holding isometrics for certain loads, when in reality, if you're contacting the ground nicely and you're doing some plyometrics, you're probably going to get the stimulus you're after.
Yeah, I've probably definitely added more, you know, incorporated more isometric type activities in recent years.
Yeah.
But even then, it's the other stuff hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
You know, I've generally, if I've gone through blocks of you know, isometric type progressions, it's always been on the, you know, inclusive with, you know, pogo jumps or, you know, skip progressions or those types of, you know, loaded marching type activities. It's always appeared there for me.
I guess the other thing with like running mechanics is it I've always looked at running mechanics, you know, obviously being a good runner, but then translating into your bowling action, you know, as in, you know, if I try to look at certain things in the action and go, you're running like shit. Well, what I think is running like shit is, you know, like heel striking, overstriding, probably sometimes the legs just dangling. That's one of the things in a technique that I might see is when someone jumps, their back foot kind of just dangles there, like it's waiting to collapse it when they sort of come into that back foot contact position.
Yes.
Someone's like wondering what sorts of things you look for or what sorts of running mechanics qualities you train in, because I think like people do have an individual style.
Yeah. But one thing I think that, you know, working towards what the common or best practice technical model for upright run for running, right, in general, if we just use running, I think that, you know, the accepted best technical model applies, and I like to work my athletes towards that, regardless of what their running performance may look like in match at that specific time. I'd like them to try and work on being better or closer towards what the optimal technical model might look like.
Yeah.
Understanding that we may not get there, right? We may not get there. But I think, you know, rightly or wrongly, I've operated on the assumption that even marginal gains in technical efficiency can, at the very worst, do no harm, and at the very best, give you some you know, elements of you know, whether it be reduced metabolic output or, you know, reduced mechanical stress. I think that there's payoffs, particularly when you're talking about the volumes and you know, amount of repetitions that we're exposing our athletes to with their skill.
Yeah.
The other thing, sort of flowing on from that, is the important thing to remember with fast bowlers is that there's really not a very long or large, you know, well, there's certainly no max velocity component to it, but even then there's a very short, and not everyone gets there either. You know, there's a very short actual upright running phase. It's basically an acceleration to the point of delivery for the majority of our players, right? And some would argue that it should be for all of our players. You know, so when I say that, I know that we have some players, and, you know, throughout the sport, you'll have some athletes that will have a little bit of a float phase in their run up, where they actually hit peak velocity or peak run up velocity. And then there's actually either a plateau or a slight dip before they actually then jump.
Gotcha.
You know, and I use the word jump loosely because, you know, I don't necessarily think that people should be jumping, but that's just semantics half the time.
No, I agree with that.
Versus a larger percentage of athletes that actually hit peak run-up velocity at the point of delivery, right? So that's what someone like Steph would, and I'm happy to be told otherwise, but my interpretation of a lot of his work is that he thinks that would be an optimal, you know, you actually continue to accelerate through.
Definitely. I mean, if you're looking at momentum and impulse and it makes sense, you want to accelerate through. I don't want to go too much into the bowling mechanics sort of things, but yeah, I think the things like jumping just sort of makes it more challenging to like hold a nice strong action as you're going through. Because if you're jumping up and then you set a mass going higher and you come down, that's probably going to make it harder to control that collision. Is there anything like that's been on your mind lately that you've sort of been curious about, or what's the latest coaching thought that you might have had? I'm curious to see what I can draw out of your mind.
Well, mate, so oftentimes it's context specific around what I'm doing or what the priorities at the moment. So the unfortunate, which might be a disappointment to you, is that you know what's interesting me is continuing to find better ways at working with other coaches and practitioners on achieving the outcomes we're trying to elicit. So that's about, you know, boring things like stakeholder management, buy-in, engagement, negotiation skills, those types of, you know, more communication-based activities, more so than the sort of X's and O's of program development or training prescription.
Yeah, well, learning, I mean, one of the things that I was curious, this on the other side, you know, like your coach-athlete relationship, where your communication style and their learning style, how you go about balancing those two kinds of things. I mean, I wouldn't qualify myself as a aggressive, psych the guys up type S&C coach. I'm happy and I'll happily run off on a rant if it's something that I'm passionate about. But yeah, that stuff's definitely interesting, but it's probably it's a broad conversation to go about learning styles, and you probably need specific context to link it together in.
But coach, the evolution of the coach is a part of that as well, right? Which is that not only is it about development of skill sets, but it's also about, you know, the maturity of the person, the skills and experiences you glean over your journey that you can call upon, the shifting generational similarities. So, you know, as a young coach, you're oftentimes working with athletes that are similar ages, similar interests, similar stages of life. So, you know, the ability to establish a line between the coach and the athlete, right? Use different. Well, I certainly had to use different tactics to maintain that line compared to what I do now at 40 plus. You know, with 3 kids and, you know, a whole set of life experiences. I'm not dealing with people like me anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't have to work hard to maintain the line between coach and athlete. It's there. It's obvious. Right. Yes. So I don't need to go on a rant about something just to establish my, you know, that I have a standard I need to uphold because I'm the coach. No, it's there. It's there.
My rants always end up being about completely irrelevant things like something in society or some sort of the whole negative positive mindset sort of thing. If I ever hear someone starting to filter out like whinging or complaining or blaming or something like that, you'll very quickly find me questioning why that's what you're choosing to run your mind through. Yeah. Anyway, well,
it's counterproductive, right? That stuff can be counterproductive.
That's it. Well, mate, I won't try to keep you any longer because I definitely could rant away all day.
was nice chatting.
Yeah, definitely. No, I appreciate you doing this. I'm definitely going to look you up in the future. I'll just check the schedule and make sure it's not going to be during a time where you're going to have very, very minimal opportunity to do external things like this.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. Well, enjoy the rest of the. I hope you enjoy the rest of the isolation period with the kids.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Aaron as much as I enjoyed having it. I hope there were some things that you could take away from that. I certainly got a lot out of it, especially having someone far more advanced in their careers than me think through some of the things that have been on my mind. The thing that stood out for me the most was the quote, just because something has low transfer doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have high value. And that's a wonderful little way of summarizing a large amount of coaching discussions that can plague a coach's mind, or that can be on a coach's mind when they're thinking about how they're going to go through developing an athlete. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to drop them below. I make sure I try and get back to everyone. If you guys enjoyed the conversation, I'd be forever grateful if you shared it. And of course, if you feel like subscribing, well, I'll leave it up to you.